Morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to Business Week. We've got still Alastair Campbell in town.
Hello.
Ta-da!
How are you?
Sit down, Alastair. You can applaud if you want.
He's too sitting here.
Bloody hell, Phil.
What's up now? Oh, what's up now?
Yeah. Thank you.
Press
There
it.
you go, brilliant. Right, here we are.
Where are you?
Yeah.
Hull. We're in Hull.
All.
You get to Hull much?
Very funny, yeah. Did you hear that?
Yeah, we're starting, aren't we?
My parents lived here for a while. In fact, my dad's last job was in Hull. He was a vet, and I grew up in Keighley in West Yorkshire, then we moved to the Midlands. But his last job was with the PDSA in Hull. And they lived in Kirkella. But then they moved, and after that, apart from JP and Alan, and the occasional visit to Championship football side. So no, not that much.
Do you think we've levelled up? Do you think we've levelled up?
No. Well,
come on.
no.
It's so difficult. We've got roadworks.
Oh yeah,
They're
you got
mending
roads,
the Hughes
yeah.
Bridge. Come on,
No,
they're so difficult to please. No, we've not, have we?
No, I think I honestly think that the trouble. I'm assuming we're going to talk a little bit about this government.
Not quite yet, but go on.
Well, they're very, very good at slogans, and that's about it.
Yeah.
And levelling up is a perfectly good slogan, and I've yet to see a strategy that matches it. And it's the same with everything else that they talk about.
Yeah, well, we're certainly not feeling it up here, to be fair.
No.
So, there is an elephant in the room at what you're best known for, so we'll get it out of the way now. What's happening at Burnley?
Well, we've gone down, and we'll have to see whether we get back up again. I think it's going to be very hard to get back up.
It is.
I think it's a lot of clubs that have gone down, and we defied gravity for quite a few years. Is the truth. Smallest squad, lowest wage bill, but we'll have to see. I've got to be honest. I was very, very upset that we went down, but I do like the Championship.
Yeah, it is. Good league,
Yeah,
isn't it?
Tuesday, Saturday.
More competitive games as well.
Yeah, exactly.
You know.
Yeah, you get fed up of losing 5-0 to Man City.
Yeah, another feeling.
Yeah.
You spotted your tree of the day yet?
Not yet. I will.
He does a tree of the day every day on his Twitter feed. So if there's one in Hull that you particularly fancy going viral nationally
And internationally.
I get a lot of
international reaction from the trees.
internationally.
I've got a picture of one that's in New Zealand.
That's all right. Yeah. New Zealand's around. It's a good country. Labour government.
We normally get the audience participation in the last 10 minutes, but I'll see what we're going to get today. We have a usual Elevenses question to try to discover the person themselves.
Okay.
And it's around about the first record you bought. Can you remember the first record you bought, where it was from, and where you got the money from?
I don't know where I got the money from, but I know exactly what record. It was Nancy and Frank Sinatra, These Boots Are Made for Walking. And I bought it the same day as I bought Mamas and the Papas each night before I go to bed. So I think I was 8 or 9. Probably money from family, around Christmas or something. Yeah.
Right. And where
In Keighley.
Is it in
In a
Keighley? So
record
you're still in
shop in
Keighley then?
Yeah.
So, bit of a Yorkshire lad then.
I've never. I think partly because of the Burnley thing. I was born in Yorkshire, but I've always felt Scottish.
Right.
My parents were very, very Scottish. I had a very Scottish upbringing. I think one of the reasons that I'm quite good at looking after myself is they did used to make me wear a kilt in Yorkshire, and I played the I learned the bagpipes as a kid, and I still play. So I've always felt Scottish.
You've not brought them with you, have you?
No.
Oh, thank God.
That's borderline racist, isn't it? Yeah. I feel Scottish. Insofar as because my family were never from Yorkshire and they moved away and they always saw themselves as Scots, I've never felt that connection. So my connection in the north really is Burnley, and of course that's Lancashire. So I feel British, Scottish, Yorkshire. I actually feel European a lot now.
Yeah.
That's gone right up. Because of the disaster of June the 23rd, 2016, which I will not move on from. And I'm desperate for the Labour Party to get a proper strategy and a proper policy on it. But no, so I don't feel... But I followed Yorkshire cricket as a child. I actually was the founder of the first Geoffrey Boycott fan club. And I bumped into him at Headingley car park, and I told him I'd founded his fan club. And he said, what do I want one of them for?
Well, it says it all, doesn't it?
Bastard.
So, on to upbringing. What sort of kid were you?
I was third of four. Boy, me, girl. And my mother never ever hid the fact that she really just wanted a daughter. And I've actually got a letter when she died. I found this letter that she wrote to her sister. It said, unfortunately, it's another boy, but he's very nice. So, yeah, she wanted a daughter. So I was third of four, dad a vet. Mum never worked after she just saw herself as, housewife mother. And we had, I had a good childhood. But I guess the big break in my childhood was when my dad had a very bad accident. He got attacked by a pig. And he was in hospital for weeks. And as a result of that, he had to give up his practice.
Occupational hazard.
Well, it was in a way, yeah. But we had to give up his practice. And that's when we moved to the Midlands, which I never liked. We lived in Leicester. So, yeah, my childhood was good. It was like, just living in Keighley. Loved Keighley. I've always loved landscape and countryside. And, I think a lot of my childhood wandering around farms with my dad. And then football, big part of it. Burnley always a big part of it. Music, a big part of it.
Why Burnley from Keighley? Why?
Well, there was a big following for Burnley and Keighley.
Really?
Yeah. There used to be about 3 or 4 coaches went every week. You've got to remember when I first saw Burnley, we were reigning league champions. The big three were Spurs, Man United, and Burnley. Yeah. So we used to go and watch Leeds, Huddersfield, Halifax, Blackburn. Because my dad was a Partick Thistle fan, he was never that bothered about Burnley. He just liked watching football. But I think it was the colours, to be honest. I think the colours got me. Yeah.
So still on upbringing, you say in the book, and we'll discuss the book in a minute, that a lot of winners feel special from an early age within that upbringing. Did you feel special from an early age?
I did, and it sounds arrogant that, but I did. I just always felt I would do something that nobody in my family had ever done before. Yeah. I always felt that. I don't know why, but I did. And I didn't know what it would be. I think I always thought I'd be a writer, like Alan Johnson here. I always thought that. But I don't know why, I did feel that, yeah. And I hope that doesn't sound arrogant, but I did. And I used to say it to my parents.
No, but you say when you studied the winners, a lot of them felt the same.
I think a lot of people do, yeah. I think you have that sense that you're just not going to have... But I love my mum to bits, right? But she had this... We used to argue a lot about 2 things. One was the Queen. She was a massive monarchist and I wasn't. But the other thing we used to argue, she had this thing about being content. Why can't you just be content? And I can remember very early in my life thinking, I don't want to be content. I don't think that the pursuit of happiness, as it's kind of defined, is what life's all about. I think it's about striving and achieving and doing and changing. And I felt that very, very young. I didn't know where it would go. And that's why I always used to argue with my teachers at school. I'd tell them I didn't think they were good enough. It's like, but I just felt I had some great teachers, but I remember one particular teacher, I remember thinking he could have been a really good teacher and he wasn't. And I was aged 11 or 12 telling him, you've got to do better. You're not bringing out the best in us. So,
I bet they loved you. So, to the present time, you're getting up to loads. You seem to be doing all sorts of things. We had Saeed Avazi at the inaugural Elevenses this time last year, and now I understand Alastair's doing a Channel 4, is it, programme with it called Make Me Prime Minister?
Yeah, it's not Make Us Prime Minister, it's 12 members of the public.
Yeah, that's right.
Prime Minister, yeah. In fact, we started yesterday, yeah. Yeah, I'm doing stuff like that. I mean, I've got a very enjoyable, varied life, which some days it feels like it adds up to something, and other days it doesn't. I'll tell you the one thing that I'm doing that is just sort of blown me away how kind of successful it's been, is this podcast I do with Rory Stewart. It's the #1 podcast in the UK at the moment, and has been for weeks, and it's just the 2 of us talking about politics. That's it. In fact, we're recording one this afternoon. So that's a bit of work. I'm editor-at-large of the New European newspaper, which we started after the referendum and is still going. I still do sort of media stuff, interviews, and I do a monthly interview for Men's Health magazine about mental health. Do a lot of mental health campaigning. My income is basically, Al Gore calls the speaking market white collar crime, but that sort of keeps the wolf from the door. And then, and I write a lot of books. So basically books, films, consultancy, strategy, and I still try and stay involved in politics, but in a very, very different way.
Yeah. Looking back at the halcyon days, somebody said something to me a while ago that really got me. There's two most important days in your life, is the day you were born and the day you find out why you were born. Looking back, what areas of your career do you think, that was just me? That was just me in my halcyon days.
I don't know really. I think, I do think the thing about what were you born for, I do feel very, very strongly that if I was here for a reason, it was to help Labour get the Tories out of power. Yeah, and I still feel that, even though the Labour Party took it upon itself to kick me out of the Labour Party for rebelling against their Brexit policy. But I still feel that. I feel that I rage at this government probably more than I've ever raged at any government. I don't know if it achieves anything, I don't know if it goes anywhere, but I feel I have to do it. But I think if the two periods, funny enough, I didn't enjoy the election wins. I don't know, the first one in particular, I always resent that. I didn't enjoy winning because I think I was worried about what was happening next, and it was on to the next thing and the next thing. I remember the Festival Hall, New Dawn, is it not? I can remember John was there, and I can remember feeling resentful at that time. I'm not enjoying this, I don't want to be here. And it's because, it's what's happening tomorrow and the next thing. The two periods that meant the most, one was the Good Friday Agreement, and the other was Kosovo. When I was at my best in doing what I was doing within the context of what was going on generally, they were the two periods that I felt I'm really motoring here.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about the Good Friday Agreement, Alastair, and what the achievement was?
Well, funnily enough, another thing I'm doing at the moment is I'm actually working with a playwright on a dramatisation of the Good Friday Agreement for TV, because I think people underestimate how hard it was. And honestly, there's so many reasons I despise this government and I despise Johnson, but one of them is the utter casual vandalism with which they're approaching the Good Friday Agreement, just using it as this little game in this tactic in their game with the European Union about trying to pretend that Brexit's going well. Or that they doing the border down the Irish Sea somehow was ever going to end in anywhere other than where we are now. But I think the reason why the story has to be told is it was really, really hard, and also I can't to this day explain fully how it happened. Because I was talking to Bertie Ahern the other day, who was the Irish Prime Minister at the time, and he was saying the same. He says, look, it sort of all fell into place, but there's no. It was you could never have taken it for granted that it was going to. It fell into place, partly, to be honest, because of all the different characters. I think if you hadn't have had Clinton as president, if you hadn't had Tony as prime minister, if you hadn't had Bertie as Taoiseach, if you hadn't have had Adams and McGuinness, if you hadn't had Trimble was probably the only leader of the Ulster Unionists who could have got them to where he was. Andy basically paid a massive price. He was finished after that. He was sort of eaten alive by the rest of them. So that collection of personalities.
Do you think there was a proper recognition at the time of that achievement?
Oh, I think at the time there was, yeah. I do. Yeah, I mean, David Trimble and John Hume got the Nobel Peace Prize, and the peace process. There's an election going on in Colombia at the moment, and I think that Jonathan Powell, who was Tony's chief of staff, and he runs an organisation now, basically taking the lessons of what we did for the Good Friday Agreement and translating them to different peace processes around the world. So I think there's a proper recognition of it. But I don't think there's a proper understanding of how difficult it was and how fragile it is of the current government.
Just looking back at those days, the opposite of that is, if I had my time to come again, I'd do differently there. That was a mistake. I regret that. Before we move on from those days, have you got anything that springs to mind in that way, that if you had your time to come again, I might do that differently?
I don't think I can answer that, because I think the stuff that we talk about it wasn't really me that was making the big decisions. I regret the fact that I think Tony Blair was the best Prime Minister of our lifetime, okay? And having worked as closely as I did with him, you're never going to change my mind on that. But I know that for a lot of people, they can't get beyond the fact of Iraq. Now, do I wish that had not happened? Yeah. But can I still defend the actions and the decisions that he took? Yes, I can. But I regret the fact, and I'll tell you, this is another reason why we've been out of power for so long. I really regret the fact that the Labour Party decided in its wisdom that Tony Blair should become a kind of persona non grata for a while after he left office. I think that was a massive mistake, because I think if you get to a position where your most successful ever leader is not respected hated by the media because we kept winning, hated by the Tories because we kept winning, but also dismissed by your own party. And that's one of the reasons why people don't remember the Labour record. And that's why you do need people out there reminding people what the record was. And, you know, I would set our record as a government against, well, certainly against this lot, but against any government, with the possible exception of the 1945 government.
So the communications took a dive then, did it, at that time?
No, I don't think it was
really, you need to if you've got a good record, you need to remind people of it, don't you?
Yeah, but we stopped, you know, I think what happened was that after Tony left, because the whole Tony Gordon thing had been, you know, gone the way that it'd gone, which was, you know, not fun for a lot of people, I think Gordon defined himself too much against Tony and not enough against Cameron. And I think then that Ed Miliband took over, and basically, the Tory line of attack on Labour was, you lot caused the crash, right? And Labour's line was, yeah, well, we kind of did. Well, you didn't. We didn't. And, you know, and then of course Corbyn, I mean, you know, he comes along and it's like, you know, the Labour government never happened. So I think, I mean, and I don't know whether we could have done more to prevent that, because, I mean, I argued, if you get the diaries, my last volume about Ed Miliband's leadership, I mean, I argued till I was blue in the face with Ed. You know, if you don't defend the record, who's going to defend it? Oh, but I've only got so much space that I can get my message through, and I've got to differentiate, and blah-de-blah-de-blah. No.
Okay, what I really wanted to talk about today was winners and winning. Business audience. We're in Business Week. You've studied it, you've written a book on it, and hopefully we can talk today what it takes, both in sport and politics as well as business. But before we start that, is there anything else other than what we've talked about that you can look back as a really big satisfying win when you got all the criteria right?
Oh, yeah, the elections.
Does it? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the 1970 election was like, everything came together at the right time, and we worked for that. But then I do think, you know, things like the peace process, and these are like the big things. I mean, and I do think ultimately, you know, political leaders do get judged on a kind of an overall record on the big things. And, you know, I think we got a lot of them right. I really do. I'm not saying we were perfect, we weren't, and you know we got a lot wrong as well. But I think generally on the big picture, I really, you know, it pains me the way that you even have to defend the Labour government now. It's ridiculous that we have to do it. And look, you know, Tony gets asked to go around the world talking about how we did. I get asked to go, and I was in New Zealand recently. They wanted to go, tell us how you did it. That's a Labour government in power. Yeah. Sort of looking at what we did and saying, well, we want to learn from what you guys did. And it's only here that we're seen in this kind of, you know, slightly, oh, you know, don't talk about them. They were, you know, they were bad.
So winning, what does it take in an overall sense?
Well, it depends what it is, but I think the reason I wrote the book at the time that I did was because I felt, this was just before the referendum, I felt as a country we were losing our understanding of winning, and I felt the Labour Party was as well. And I wanted to kind of write a book that was about trying to encapsulate what a winning mindset is, what you can learn from other people who are winners right across the piece. And I do think the biggest thing is having a clear understanding of strategy and the difference between...
You called it the Holy Trinity, didn't you?
Well,
There's a Holy Trinity of
Trinity
strategy, teamship,
and leadership. Yeah, I don't think you can have one without the other two.
Exactly.
For example, I'll give you an example. So, yeah, my Holy Trinity, strategy, leadership, teamship, you can put them in any order, right? Because I don't think you can have if you don't have a leader, you're not going to have a good team. If you don't have a strategy, you're going to have neither. If you don't have a strategy, you haven't got a good leader, actually. And if I think about the mess that we're in as a country now, and this isn't hindsight, by the way, because I wrote this before the referendum, and I said, Cameron, if you look at Cameron, when Cameron was Prime Minister, and he was on the telly and people were saying, Prime Minister arrived today and met, Barack Obama, whatever. I didn't think that's utterly ridiculous that he's the Prime Minister, right? The guy had certain leadership skills, right? He had quite a good team, right? He had some decent people in the cabinet, he had a decent team around him. He had, he wasn't utterly useless, right? But I think he was absolutely hopeless at strategy. And the referendum was a tactic to deal with Euroscepticism. It wasn't a strategy to deal with Euroscepticism. And that's why we're in the mess that we're in now. Likewise, I think Johnson's not a strategist. Johnson hasn't got a clue what he wants to do for the country. Not a clue.
You say in the book, Alastair, that business really don't get a strategy sometimes.
Well, some do.
Well either.
Some do, but most don't.
So what is it?
Well, I think I'll tell you a story that I wrote about in the book. I was doing this speech in Germany. As I've been telling you, I'm obsessed with German, and I only listen to the German news these days. It's really good for your health, by the way. But I was doing this conference in Germany, and this woman came up to me at the end of it. The conference was about crisis management, and the woman came up to me at the end and she said, "Look, it's really interesting hearing you talk about that, because this company that I'm involved in, and it's a big German company, we've got a bit of a crisis on at the moment, and could do with a bit of help." So I went to see them in their headquarters, right? Incredibly lavish offices, very well-dressed people, incredibly well paid, all with their chauffeur-driven Daimlers and BMWs and Mercedes outside. And I asked them to explain what this crisis was. And they explained it, and I said, well, it doesn't sound like a crisis to me at all. It's like, you've got a bit of a problem. So then I gave them this sheet of paper, and I said, fill this sentence in. Our objective as an organisation is ... And honestly, these are some of the best paid people in Europe, and they didn't know what to say. Or they said different things. Then I said, turn it over, and on the other side, our strategy to meet our objective is ... And they didn't have and I said to them, you don't have a crisis, you have a problem driven by the fact you haven't got an agreed strategy. And I describe strategy as the big how. It's not the bits. The bits are the tactics, and they're the easy bit once you've got the strategy. But it's the big how. Your objective, that's what we want to achieve. Your strategy is the big how. So if I go back to New Labour, our strategy was New Labour. It was modernisation. That was the strategy. And everything flowed from that. Objective, we wanted to win. Clear, right? Once we got into government, we wanted to govern well and win again, right? Strategy, the whole way through, was modernisation. And the teamship comes from, the reason why you can't do it without a team is because anything big and difficult, what has any individual, even a golfer, you take Tiger Woods when he was in his pomp, he had a team. You had to have a guy who was looking after his muscles, looking after his diet, looking after his mind. So I think you've got to get those three things going together. And I think that the pressures of the modern age are all about tactics. It's like,
the now.
Well, it's the now, and it's like, you go to these, well, should we get a new website? Well, maybe not. Don't know. What do you want to do with it? What's the purpose? And honestly, the stuff I do with it, I work with this Portland PR company, and often the people that you're talking to, they think they need PR help, and they think it's about getting a better press through doing better social media engagement. That's a tactic. What do you want it for? One of the things I'm very happy about in my life is that, and in fact, I remember having a conversation with John actually around about 2000 when we decided, I think way ahead of Tony on this, but we decided actually there's no point worrying about what the papers say about you. Papers like the Mail, papers like the Express, that you're never going to get a fair hearing from them. So just either ignore them or attack them, okay? And I would argue that the people that I admire in public life are the ones who keep going and do well despite getting a bad press. And it is amazing how much bad press you can survive as long as you're clear about where you're going. And I think too many people, they think it's about getting a good press. Well, it's not. It's about what you're trying to do. What is your good press achieving for you? You think of some of the most successful people in sport, you know, Mourinho. Mourinho's had tons of bad press. Fergie, tons of it. Wenger, tons of it. You know? Keep going. Show them that you're better than your critics are.
The leadership bit of the Holy Trinity, I love the comment that great leaders confront the anxiety in their people. I've never heard that said before.
That's J.K. Galbraith.
Is it?
Yeah.
Really resonated with me.
Yeah, he said the act of leadership essentially is about confronting the anxieties of people that you're leading. I think that's one form of leadership. I mean, look, I think leadership is about inspiring people to go to where you want them to go and take them with you. And you get all sorts of different leaders. You know, there's no one sort of leader.
I love the study on Angela Merkel.
Yeah.
Who gives hope to the non-charismatic.
Well, she does in a way. Yeah. I mean, she's getting a very bad press at the moment because of the oil reliance on Russian oil and Putin and all that. But I think Angela Merkel's an astonishing story. I mean, I don't know if you know this, ladies in the room. Angela Merkel travelled everywhere with a personal stylist. Do you know why? Her stylist job was to make sure that nobody ever talked about how she looked. So she had to look the same. The clothes were the same. The makeup was the same. The hair was the same. Because she didn't want that to be the thing that people focused on. And I think that's why, you know, when people talk about, I don't quite get this thing about Keir Starmer. People say, oh, he hasn't got charisma. I don't quite understand what it means. Charisma is the ability to lead people where they don't necessarily want to go. That's the classic definition of charisma. And, you know, it's related to charm. It comes from the same etymological root. And I think that there's no one way. If you look at something like Barack Obama, the guy's got charisma coming out of his ears. His voice, his face, his backstory. It's like, but, you know, Angela Merkel would look at somebody like Obama and say, I can never ever deliver a speech like that. But I'm probably better at managing my relations with other leaders. You know, you're doing different things. And I think, for example, with Clinton and Tony in particular, I think they had such charisma that people, including their opponents, often made the mistake of thinking that's what their strengths were. Their strengths actually were about making difficult decisions and persuading people that they were the right thing to do.
And Clinton was great in a crisis, wasn't he?
Oh, Clinton was unbelievable.
And he had one or two, didn't he?
He had a few crises to enjoy.
Why was he good in the crisis? What was it about him and the way he handled the crisis that made him so good at it, Alastair?
I think he was able to separate out what was happening in his own life from what his job was. I interviewed him for the book and he said that when the whole Levinsky thing was going on, and that's when he told me that he said, I keep reading I'm the most powerful man in the world. I'm sleeping on the couch. You know, I did not feel very powerful. And also but he basically said that he got up every day, and it's interesting, if you go back and study it, he never talked about it unless he was asked about it. You know, he didn't feel that need to go out and address what everybody's talking about. He actually went out and he'd talk about jobs, he'd talk about, you know, stuff that he felt people cared about. And whereas this lot, you see Johnson at the moment, I don't know if you saw him last night, and by the way, he's got to get drug tested after these interviews, honestly. Last night, just way out of it. But what I see in Johnson, he does this thing about what people want us to be talking about. Have you noticed that? He says, what people want us to talk about, they don't want you to talk. They want you to do stuff. And what Clinton was going out, he was going out and showing, not telling. And he said it sustained him.
Yeah.
Because what he felt was, when he was out there, he felt people were looking at him thinking, not sure about your behaviour, but I think you're still in the right place, and you know, and he got through it.
What about Putin? You've had one or two lunches with him, I understand. Where do you think we stand with him now?
I think it's, I mean, look, it's really interesting. When Tony took a risk on Putin because we met him before he became president. And that was because everybody knew he was going to be president. And on the first meeting, I can remember, as he left, I can remember Tony saying, he won't mind me saying this, I'm sure, I remember Tony saying, think he's going to be all right, that guy. And we did, because he was saying all the right things.
Yeah.
He was talking about reform, he was talking about embracing the West. And then I think by the end of it, my last, I left Number 10 in 2003, and I think I said in my book, in my diary, it was the most extraordinary diplomatic meeting I've ever been at. Was a dinner. Putin invited Tony over. This was during the whole Iraq thing. And he invited him over. We did a little press conference, and then we had this dinner, and Putin absolutely laid into him like I've never seen anybody, with the possible exception of myself, laid into Tony in a way you would not believe. He didn't quite call him Bush's poodle, but it wasn't far off. And there was a venom, and there was a nastiness, and there was a curled lip that was really quite astonishing. I thought, wow, that's just, what's that, 4 years? Mm. And I saw Francois Hollande the other day, and was chatting to him. He was dealing with Putin around about the time of the Minsk Accord on Ukraine. So you're now another 8 years, and by then he was full on dictatorial, and we've had another decade since then. So this is a guy who just, when people talk about what goes on inside his head, I don't think any of us really know. And I'll tell you what, though, he thinks he can see this out. Got no doubt about that. He thinks he can see this out.
Coming to business, then. A leader I've always massively admired in business, Richard Branson. I know it's an easy win for someone like me, but I've always really admired him. I love the boldness in him. When you look at his career, the decisions he made, very bold decisions, and I love the challenger brand in him. He's always challenging the. Do you agree on Branson?
I do, yeah, and I interviewed him for the book as well, and I think he's a really interesting example, Branson, because he would not make it in politics. He's not very articulate. He's not very good with sort of people's situations. But what he's really, really, really good at is having ideas and surrounding himself with the people who are going to make it work. And even though he's got a big ego in that he understands the power of his own profile, I don't think he's got that kind of narcissistic ego that quite a lot of big business people have. I don't know Musk, right? But I look at Elon Musk, and he strikes me as more on the kind of narcissistic end of leadership. I don't think Branson is. I think Branson is about big, bold ideas and changing the world. And I think the other thing that's interesting about Branson, I think, is that he's restless. He's endlessly restless and curious. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah.
I don't think he ever settles. Yeah. He's not content.
He's aging well as well.
Yeah, he is aging well, yeah, for sure.
God, yeah. The overall winner in the book, if we could say there was one, was a very surprising one, being Her Majesty the Queen. For a staunch Republican like you to come to the conclusion that the overall winner that you saw was Her Majesty the Queen.
Well, I'll tell you what happened there. I'd interviewed all these different people, and I was talking to John Brown, the BP guy, about crisis management, because he got involved in pretty difficult crisis when he was at BP, and it was towards the end of all the kind of research that I've been doing with the book, and I was taking him through. I was going through all the things that I think you need to tick to be a winner, a leader, etc. So I was saying, you've got to have leadership skills, you've got to understand strategy, you've got to be adaptable, you've got to be resilient, you've got to be good in a crisis, you've got to be able to build a team, you've got to be able to inspire. I went through all the different things that you did. And I said, all the people I've talked to and all the people I've analysed, I've sort of got them in this list, and I've ticked them off, and I haven't got anybody who's got 100%. And it was John, he said, have you thought about the Queen? I thought, that's a bit weird. But then I went away and I thought about it, and because I'd got to know quite a lot of her people during the aftermath of Princess Diana's death, I knew enough of them to go and to be able to talk to them about how they did strategy. And it was fascinating. It was really, really interesting. So watching the Jubilee in the last few days, it's just fascinating for me to watch, because I can see what they're doing in that bigger strategic context. And you can't look, it's not just the fact of 70 years, it's the fact of 70 years through all the turbulence that she's been through to end up at the position where she is now, where honestly, I don't think there's any point being a Republican anymore. Not while she's around, because it's just, you know, they
win.
They win. You know, end of. And now that whether that changes in the future, I don't know, but I don't think so, because I think the other thing you're going to get, we've just had a warm up of it, right? But I'm telling you, when the Queen finally dies, it is going to be like nothing we have ever seen. And that is going to be, that will be then used by them as the next bridge to the next chapter, and that's all about legacy. And you can't, I'm afraid, it's just, it's
I thought the book was
textbook.
nice and circular because we ended up with that lot having the Holy Trinity. They've been so, they ended up where they've ended up right now because the strategy, the teamship, the leadership.
And the
was bang on.
thing is, they've done it because Prince Philip once said, he said the only two people they had this ridiculous, I think they call it the Way Ahead group, where they all sat around talking about, you know, whether they should go on buses and all this sort of stuff, and one of the advisors was talking about, you know, the need to develop a strategy. And Prince Philip apparently said the only two people who talk about strategy more than you were Hitler and Stalin, and look where that ended. So they would argue they're not doing strategy, but they are.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing I'd say about the Queen, I think that, I mean, look, I'm instinctively not a monarchist, right? I think the whole sort of class thing in Britain is a big problem, and I think the monarchy is the peak of it. And the whole hereditary thing and the honour system and all that stuff, it just sort of, I've never really bought into it. But the fact is that, you know, what they are brilliant at is just these slow adaptations to kind of get with to just stay popular. And the other thing, so one of the guys I talked to, he said, look, I know you don't understand it, but let me try and explain it to you. The reason why the hereditary principle works with the Queen and with Prince Charles is because every day that they wake up, they know they have done nothing to deserve the position that they're in. And that is what drives her duty and humility. Now, I don't know if that's right or wrong, but it was I thought it was an interesting observation. And so when you see the Queen, so like the thing with Paddington Bear, right? Genius, right? So there's the Queen, she wouldn't have done that 10 years ago. Well, she might have done because she did the thing with James Bond, but she wouldn't have done it 30 years ago. But she's done it now because that's their way of adapting. But when you look at her, she's just being the Queen. She's being the Queen, taking a marmalade sandwich from her handbag, and it's normal, right? And that's how they adapt. You know, so she's got a Facebook page, right? But when you go on her Facebook page, it's a picture of her on a horse with a headscarf. She's just being the Queen like she's always been the Queen. And I think it's just, look, it's easy. It's a lot easier. I felt this with the coverage over the last, I mean, honestly, some of the coverage, it was so sort of saccharine and all that. So it's a lot easier if you've got a media that basically is saying whatever they do is great. If ever they crack a joke, it's the best joke that's ever been made. Anybody who ever met her says she's a wonderful person. That's fine, right? That makes it easier, but it doesn't, at the same time, you've still got to do the stuff that they do. And I think you're right, strategy, leadership and teamship, they've got it.
Yeah.
And the other thing, they're ruthless as well, so they narrowed the team when it suited them as well.
Yeah.
They made a very distinct decision. We're going to focus on the Queen and Philip, Charles and a rehabilitated Camilla, and William and Kate. And that's what they've done. I mean, you know, Andrew got COVID.
Could we talk a little bit about the winning mindset? Is it real? How do you get it? Do people have it or not? Can you acquire it?
I think you can definitely develop it. You know, why do these top sports teams why do they have psychologists?
Yeah.
Why do they, you know, share their best practice and ideas? Because they think you can learn it. Why did Alex Ferguson's teams have a higher than normal proportion of games that were won in the last 5 minutes of a game? Because he had an absolute killer winning mindset, and he translated that to the team. I think one of my favourite interviews was, I don't know if you're into cricket, but Wasim Akram, Pakistani fast bowler, and he said the difference between an average winning mindset and a killer winning mindset is knowing the difference between wanting to win and will to win. And I thought that was a really interesting observation. Everybody wants to win. I'll give you another one, Gary Neville. Gary Neville, who by his own admission is not even the best footballer in his own house when he was growing up, let alone in the country, and he knew that, and he knew that if he was going to make it as a footballer, which he wanted to do, he would have to make more sacrifices than more talented footballers. So he went out with his mates when he was 16 and told them he was never going to go out with them again. Because he said, I'm not going to drink, I'm not going to go out. If I'm playing football, I've got to sleep. So that's will to win. Because it's, are you prepared to do the things that you need to do to win? Yeah. Wanting to win.
There'll be people who should be winners, but they just don't have the winning mindset.
Yeah, exactly. There's loads of them. There's loads of them.
Any spring to mind?
No, I think like we all, you meet people.
Dele Alli.
Well, I think Dele Alli is a good example of somebody who, at one point looked like he was going to be the best player in England. Something's gone wrong. He's now sort of a bench player at Everton, who should have been relegated. So yeah, but I think that and equally you meet loads of people who are, way overachieving from what you think maybe their natural talent would dictate. And I think that's all about mindset.
What about the power of visualisation then? Because there's a lovely passage in the book where...
Oh, you're not going to make me talk about playing with Maradona, are you? No, you can't do that. I never.
Oh, no.
I don't like
well, I
doing
promise
that.
not to, but I'm going to force you into it.
No, I can't talk about Maradona. I mean, I only do that every single day. I think visualisation...
These guys won't know the story though, Alice. It's a lovely story.
Well, no, I'd played in this charity match with Maradona, and on the morning, it was the first Soccer Aid, and on the morning of the game, well, I couldn't sleep. I was so excited, honestly. I just could not sleep. So I got up about 5 o'clock and I went for a walk. I actually walked to Old Trafford to have a look at the stadium. And I think I'm playing there later today with Maradona. I go back to the hotel. The only other person who was up was Maradona. And he wanted to go for a kickabout at Old Trafford. And he asked me if I wanted to go with him. Yeah. Yeah, I can do that, yeah. So we're going to have this kickabout on the pitch. And literally just me and him for like almost an hour, knocking the ball about. But before we started knocking the ball about, he walked around the stadium, and he was just like, he was doing all these kind of like big breathing, and he was sort of just, it was all a bit weird. And I'm thinking, well, he's about, I better copy him. So I'm doing this. So you obviously got to do this. So, and then we started knocking the ball about, and he made me line up 6 balls and tap them into him. And the first one, he hit the bar. Yes. Hit the bar, just missed the bar, And then the last one, he goes this thing, he puts his leg out there, lets it roll up his leg, off his thigh, flicks it off his thigh, goes into a kind of right angle volley, bang, slams it into the top corner, right? And he then ran around the pitch like he'd won the World Cup. He was knee sliding, he was kissing the badge, there was nobody in the stadium apart from 3 groundsmen, right? So we're all looking at this. So anyway, we then get into, this is one of the most surreal moments of my life. Diego and I in the shower together.
Diego and I.
Right. In the shower. I'm admiring his Fidel Castro tattoo on his leg. And I just said to him, I said, what was that all about? All that running about? And he says, visualize victory. Brilliant.
The power of visualisation.
Yeah.
I think it's about time we passed over to you lot, if anybody has anything they'd like to ask. Alastair, who has the first question?
Yes, sir.
One behind you, then you.
No microphone, so I'll just ask. So, talking about winning, I haven't read your book, but I will immediately go out and buy it and read it.
One.
Yeah, you should have got
Look
them
at
all.
Alan there. Time, get that.
You've talked a lot about leaders from 20 years ago. Are there any today, or is there something wrong with the way we have those 3 key things? There aren't any politicians that I can see, either party, no one you think, yeah, whatever your politics, you're an amazing leader. Business, hard to think of them. Why is that? Is it because we're not producing them, because of our education system? Is it because we're so scared of what people think of us because of the power of Twitter? Why is that? Do you agree?
I do agree, although I think it's probably the case that every generation has probably said it. I mean, if you think about the period that we've lived through recently, if you go around the world, we mentioned Merkel. I think Merkel's an exceptional leader. I think Macron's an exceptional leader. I think that Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, although she's struggling a bit at home at the moment, but I think actually she's got real leadership skills. I think the other thing to remember is there aren't that many. I think one of the problems about the funny enough, we're talking about this on the podcast with Rory Stewart the other day, that one of the problems with the way that politics is taught is that we teach about the amazing heroes. We talk about Mandela, we talk about Martin Luther King, we talk about Lincoln, you talk about Churchill, right? There aren't that many like that. And actually there's not enough done to explain that actually there are lots of political leaders, locally and nationally and internationally, doing quite a lot of amazing stuff all the time that none of us have ever heard about. And so I think the denigration of politics and public life has been a big part of this. But equally, so that's the first thing, is that there aren't that many who are really, there've never been that many who are, at that level. But then I do think I think we're constantly, partly through media, I think we are constantly narrowing the gene pool. I think we're making more and more people thinking that politics is just a completely horrible, unacceptable way of life. And I don't want to do it. And that's why you end up with people like Nadine Dorries as cabinet ministers. I mean, it's just not funny, is it? But she's in the cabinet and she's in charge of culture. It's like now I look at the current cabinet, maybe two of them that I could have imagined getting a mid-ranking ministerial job with Mrs. Thatcher. So there's definitely been a diminution of the overall quality, no doubt about that. And I think that's a big part of it. I think ultimately people have got to work out their own responsibility in this, because the truth is we all do it. Everybody sits around saying all politicians are liars. Well, actually, no, they're not. Very few politicians are like Boris Johnson. They're all the same. Well, no, they're not. Donald Trump was not the same as Hillary Clinton. Jeremy Corbyn was not the same as David Miliband, dare I say, or Alan Johnson, who should have been the Labour leader at one point. But anyway, we won't go there.
Just back onto strategy, Alastair. If you said in the 90s, in opposition, you got your strategy right. If you were with Labour now, what type of strategy should they be looking at to challenge at the next election?
The key word is challenge. I think they should have a strategy rooted in setting out the really big challenges facing the country and have a exciting and innovative and radical debate about how they're going to meet those challenges. I think they think that policy means you've got to have every sort of T crossed and I dotted, and you've got to explain that's what we're going to do. Yeah. And they're a bit trapped in the whole sort of tax and spend debate as well. But actually, if you think about inequality, about climate change, about Europe, about levelling up, the whole kind of, inequality within regions and between regions, then, they've got to have a really exciting policy debate. And at the moment, I don't really see it happening.
Be in opposition then?
No, it's not about being in opposition. It's about, for example, today, right, with all that's going on, I'd be out there today talking about how would a Labour government drive up standards in public life? How might you toughen the ministerial code? How might you have an oath to Parliament that isn't about swearing allegiance to the Queen just, but it's actually about committing yourself to honesty and integrity? In other words, I used to have a thing in '97. I wanted to get to a position, even before the campaign, where at least 2 days a week, preferably 3 or 4, we were the lead political story on the BBC News, right? When was the last time that Labour were doing that? Where it's about them saying what they're going to do. It's, they just get tagged on the end.
Called it making the weather, didn't you?
Yeah, making the weather. You've got to make the weather. Yeah. And I think it's in that sense of, don't define yourself by the past. What's the world today? What are the big challenges we face and how we're going to meet them? That's where the strategy's got to be.
In saying that, are they up against a barrier with the editorial say, the BBC, Sky, of ITV, because they won't let them, they won't ask the question.
No, I don't agree with that. I don't think you can... Look, we have a biased media, right? The written press is horribly biased, right? And my criticism of the broadcasters, who I think in the main do quite a good job, my criticism is that they allow themselves to get influenced by that. Classic example, if the Daily Mail had not banged on about that ridiculous nonsense with Keir Starmer in Durham 14 days in a row, the broadcasters would never have touched it, right? They touched it because that is what was, the papers are driving that. But I don't think it's good enough for the Labour Party to say it's about the biased media, because the media will cover stuff if it's interesting, if it's newsworthy, and if it sort of speaks to people's lives. And at the moment, you know, so for example, one of the things we did, remember we did this thing in opposition, the road to the manifesto, right? It was a way of saying, we're going to end up with a manifesto, but we're going to take you on that journey with a process. And here's all the different policy areas where we're going to debate and review. And Tony would take a few bold, big positions, and, you know, Gordon would be doing his tax and spend stuff, and John would be, you know, going out on the environment and transport and all this stuff. And we'd be out there, and you weren't sort of saying we've got all the answers. We're saying we're taking you on a journey to get the answers. And I feel at the moment, Labour just is slightly... I think part of the problem, you know, is that the generation that's now the shadow cabinet, they were developing as politicians where, in a time when people thought Labour were going to win forever. And I think they underestimate just how hard it is to win against this lot. And you've got to be in people's heads all the time.
Questions through the chair, please. See me afterwards. We'll go on down here, Arthur.
How different would life be if you got the other Miliband?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's impossible to... You can't prove counterfactuals, can you? I think David would have beaten David Cameron, but I don't know that.
I'm sure.
You can never be sure, but I think it's probable. I think David could have beaten David Miliband, could have beaten David Cameron. But, you know...
Resent the influence of the unions in that process?
No, I think in any electoral system, you've got to play with the playing field that you've got. You know, look, David is a very... look, Ed's a friend of mine, but David's like a close friend of mine. And you know, David didn't fight a perfect campaign. You know, you met too many people who felt he was taking them for granted, and, you know. So, look, politics is, in the end, it is about relationships, isn't it? And but yeah, I do think David would probably have. He certainly would not have allowed that gap to open between the record of a Labour government and the future plans of a future Labour government. He would not have allowed that.
Any chance of him coming back?
I don't think so.
Hey, you've already had two.
I don't.
You see me in my office as well.
Sorry.
Charles, then Kath.
Through you, Mr. Chair. You said something absolutely fascinating a few minutes ago. When I was on the way in, David Davis was speaking, and he was being asked why he had changed his position on Boris. And he repeated the words that you used almost exactly talking about Branson. Branson recognised his limitations and had a good team around him. Is when Boris was Mayor of London and did a reasonable job, he had a really good team of people around him, helping with policy, helping with strategy, helping with delivery. And he said that the issue now, and I want to make a statement, Paul, with a question. He said now he's not doing that. You've answered the point that of that current cabinet, perhaps two of them might have made mid-ranking ministers. So I suspect what you're probably saying in that is he has limitations which he does not recognise now. He may have recognised it before. Has a team around him that's incapable of driving what's needed.
No, I think it's worse than that. I think he recognises limitations, and for that reason does not want any strong people near him. You know, one of Tony's great strengths as a leader, I think, was that he liked to be surrounded by people who were good at what they did. And he didn't mind having, you know, somebody like Gordon rampaging around. I mean, he minded it, but he understood that he still brought something, whereas Johnson doesn't want anybody that could be seen as a threat. And I do believe, I don't know this, but I'm absolutely pretty sure that number 10 were behind that absolute defenestration of Sunak, because Sunak was becoming the one to watch, and he's now, you know, toast.
It's occurred to me as you've been sort of talking this morning about leadership and the way that you look at the leadership of the country, and wonder about that. And I know it's a cliche in some ways, but that diversity issue that really has never happened in politics. And you know, I've spent years as an NHS chair having it drummed into my head that my board needs to reflect the community that we serve, so that people can look at us and say, there's somebody there that looks like me. And I don't think, even with all the effort, and there's some obvious examples like Sunak, but it's not really spread, has it, into politics, either nationally or locally, where you can look up and look at that diversity of people and think, yeah, that looks like my community. Because it doesn't still, does it? It's still white, and it's still on the whole male, and that doesn't seem to be changing at all. Is that a problem, the way people see?
Well, I think it's changing in parts. It's like, I think I'm right in saying the Welsh Assembly, for example, because they've got, I don't know whether you call it positive discrimination, but they have aimed for 50-50, and they've gone 50-50 men, women. On the ethnic makeup, I don't know what the situation is there. You've got to remember as well, though, that a lot of people are looking at that and have been resenting the moves, the changes. So I think it's a very difficult. I actually do think when we did the women only shortlist, I think we were doing the right thing. I believed in that. I think that sometimes you've got to say, I'll give you another cliche. You've got to crack eggs to make omelettes, and I think I also think that. I actually think that our politics is, particularly on the Conservative side, obviously, is way, way, way too skewed towards private education as the background for politics, and that's something that now how you quotes legislate, how you mandate for that to be changed. I don't know how you're going to do that without actually at some point saying this is a problem, we've got to address it. But I think the other thing is I think it's really weird this, but politics doesn't. People like to think that, like someone like David Davis likes to think he's a great maverick. Not sure he is, but politics doesn't lend itself to mavericks in a way that I think other countries do. You know, you go to watch the German Parliament, you see all sorts of, weird and wacky people in there who are adding a bit something different. I think ultimately, I don't know, these guys I'm sure will not agree with this, but I am sort of moving to thinking that our electoral system has fundamentally got to change. I can't. Are you with me on that?
All my life.
Of course, you've always been
it's a big opportunity we missed.
Yeah.
That was a supplemental question, is the answer to that, to get away from...
Whether it's PR or not, I don't know, but it's definitely is not the current electoral system. You've got to remember, Johnson is probably sitting there today thinking, well, if I can get through a bit of this... I think he's toast, right? I think he's finished, but he'll be thinking, as long as I survive, I only need a bit more than a third of the vote. And I'm going to make it harder for poor people to vote, and I'm going to make it easier for us to get more dodgy money in to run campaigns. So, he'll be thinking he can still do it, and he can only do it because of our pretty ridiculous electoral system.
John, in the words of a tweet.
In the words of a tweet?
Yes.
Why is John
in other words, we've only got a couple left, and I want the question to be less than the answer.
And, he's a hero of mine. I follow him on Twitter. I read his books. And this isn't a question. This is a thank you. Thank you for all the work that you're doing to reduce that stigma of mental health. And your work that you're doing with the charities throughout the country and in all of you, mate. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Alastair, thank you for everything today. I just want to focus on the shadow cabinet for a second. We talked about a dearth of leadership, strength and quality in the cabinet. There's a lot of the same issue in the shadow cabinet. I mean, some of them are a gift to the Tory party every time they speak. Can you be part of the quality and the strength going forward if Tony can't?
Well, I'm not a member of the party.
Helps.
I do try. I do honestly try. I think actually there are some good people. I think that, look, if you go back, I think we were blessed in 1997. We had an exceptional number of really good people. You know, I mean, sadly, quite a lot of them are dead now. You know, people like Donald Dewar and Moe and, you know, I think about people even like Jack Cunningham and John Reed. You just, you know, you just knew that if they were going on the telly or the radio, they were never, ever, ever going to drop the ball. It's like, you know, whereas this, if I was working in Number 10 now, running their media, every time these clowns were on television, I'd have my heart in my mouth. You know, James Cleverly, right? I mean, has anybody ever been more ill-named, with the possible exception of Andrew Adonis? It's like, you know, Liz Truss is the Foreign Secretary. You just think, how has this happened? So, but I look at, you know, I think, look, Keir's not Tony Blair and he's not Barack Obama, but I think I can imagine Keir being Prime Minister. I can see that. I think Rachel Reeves is good. I think Pat McFadden is unsung hero. I think he's brilliant. Peter Kyle, I think, is really good. I think Wes Streeting's good. I think there's some good people. There's some good people. But the other thing I say to them all is most of them could walk down most streets in Britain and nobody has a clue who they are. So we're back to the thing about getting yourself heard and noticed. And that's about saying and doing interesting things. It's not about being tagged on the end of a story about Rishi Sunak's budget. It's what are you going to do?
Who has the final question?
Gentleman there. Who's
anytime she sees the news, there's a Snapchat notification going to her Apple Watch, and she believes everything that she sees on TikTok is gossip. So, in relation to that, how much of a challenge is it, do you think, of politicians nowadays that memes are created because of the newspaper articles, and how should they aim to combat that in the time that's probably changed from when you were?
I think the answer goes back to what we're talking about, strategy. I think that's all fine, as long as what you're doing on TikTok is the same in a different format to the 50-minute speech you've just made about the future of the planet. You know, it's just, as long as you get the strategy and the big arguments right, I think that's useful to the politician. What I think too many of them are doing are assuming that actually it's whether they can do the 30-second TikTok video or whether they can get 1 million followers. It's not, it's about what they're communicating. So I always say about strategy, a good strategy should be able to get down to a word, a phrase, a sentence, a paragraph, a page, a speech, and a book, right? So what's your word? If you're on about TikTok, what's the one word you want people to remember of what you're saying? It's a different medium, but that's just the tactic. Now, where I think there's a bigger problem is the whole thing about, you know, disinformation and fake news and all that stuff. But if you look at somebody like Trump, right? I mean, look, I can't stand the guy, but you have to recognise he's got amazing, very peculiar communication skills. He doesn't know how to do that stuff, but he knows what he's saying. There's this election going on in Colombia at the moment. The guy who might win is this very right-wing populist guy who has come out of nowhere, right? And he got 28% in the first round, and he's now going on to the second round, and he's building up quite a lot of support. And he's done it and they're calling him the TikTok candidate, but it's what he's saying that's getting through. You know, so I think people can overestimate the challenges of social media. I actually think it's as long as you see it as the tactic, not the strategy, it's useful to a politician.
Alastair, thanks for coming to Hull.
Pleasure.
See you in the playoffs this time next year.
I think we might get automatic.
See you in the playoffs this time next year. And now we need to go and find a tree.
Yeah, there's loads of them. There's trees around here. Trees everywhere. Billions.
Would you like to thank Alastair in the normal way?
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.